there's some fascinating differences in Romeo and Juliet of Gounod and in the stage play that all of you doubtless know. One of them, for example, is that there's this little rugrat of a character, Stefano, who incites Tybalt's rage. You know, the duel that eventually has Tybalt kill Mercutio and Romeo kill Tybalt and this whole mess that happens. It's incited in part by this stinky little character, by this little nasty page singing basically a taunting song. So that's one thing that you'll notice immediately. And just on dual music in general, I want to mention that in Gounod, we have this classic sort of operatic device of intense counterpoint, like almost fugal style writing, signaling contention. And we know that it's sort of signaling duels, signaling fighting. So it's as if the instrumental lines are fighting with each other, and we have a fight on stage. Right? This is classic operatic technique. By no means is Gounod the only one who does this sort of thing. I mean, I'm a Britten scholar. I love Benjamin Britten's music, and even he does that in the later 20th century. So counterpoint signaling fighting is no big thing. And we know, in fact, that Gounod was a little bit nervous because in this opera there are multiple duels on stage, right? There's lots of sword fighting and lots of bandying about of swords. So he was worried that it would get a little old, that it would get a little stale to do the same contrapuntal technique, signaling fighting, every single time. So he does vary that a little bit. We do have that difference, the difference of Stefano's song inciting this duel. Also, we have an extensive wedding tableau in Act 4. Instead of just having sort of Juliet, in that famous scene in Romeo and Juliet in the play, when the father, when the Capulet father comes in and says, you're going to have to marry this other guy, and she argues and he threatens to throw her out, all this sort of stuff happened. That was possibly part of the original production, or the original design, but it got jettisoned in favor of a wedding tableau where Juliet's character goes through the whole wedding process. She's about to be wed, and then she's taken this poison already, and so she collapses at the altar, more or less, in this very dramatic scene. And Gounod was a little bit nervous about this, actually. He felt like this was a little bit maybe the wrong direction for things to go. But in Paris, in the 1860s, in fact, in Paris, maybe in the 19th century in general, you had to have a tableau, right? You had to have spectacle. You had to have a ritual on stage. You had to have a ceremony on stage. You had to have a large sort of divertissement, right? In the best French tradition, where people are dancing about, or you have, things coming in from the wings and stuff coming down from the flies, and, the devil coming up from the floor, and you have to have all of these things, right? You have to satisfy your audience in that way. Seems like Gounod wasn't actually very interested in doing that initially, but he ended up caving to that, so that's a difference between the opera and the play. Another thing, and all of you, those of you who know Gounod, you know this because this part has such wonderful evocative music. But, of course, in the play, Romeo thinks that Juliet is dead at the end, right? Kills himself, and after he dies, she wakes up. But in the opera, you can't have that. Why?
You've got another chance for a wonderful duet.
Exactly, you've got to have that duet. You've got to have that duet. And so we have a dying duet between Romeo and Juliet, and of course, it's soaringly beautiful music. At least for Gounod, it is, and it brings to mind things that we've heard earlier in the opera. There are all of these reminiscence motifs that come back and remind us of sort of beautiful moments that we've heard in the score. So all of those things are differences. Having said that, there are also some things that are very much the same. And you'll notice this, I think, in the supertitle translations. You're never sure what they're going to do in supertitles. But there are moments that call to mind precise lines in the play Romeo and Juliet. We have a plague on both your houses, which seems a little bit forced, because the way that fight comes about, where Mercutio dies, has totally been shifted around. So it loses some of its sting for that in the libretto. The libretto is by this sort of powerhouse of mid-century French librettists. Maybe you know these guys, Jules Barbier and Michel Carré. They also did Faust. They were involved in a number of sort of 1860s, late 1850s, 1860s productions. Shortly thereafter, actually, the team sort of broke up. It was very common in the French 19th century for librettists to work in airs. And so these two did several of Gounod's most famous works. But we can't actually find the source, the original source of their libretto. I mean, of course we have the play, but we can't find the French source because it sort of slips in and out of referencing the real play and sort of being a concatenation of other versions. So it's sort of a piecemeal product of the collective consciousness of Romeo and Juliet at mid-century in the Second Empire. So it's a pretty interesting document in that way because it tells you what was important about Romeo and Juliet for this audience, right? It tells you what really stuck for them. And one of the things that I think is remarkable is that you have so much of the time on stage shared by Romeo and Juliet singing together. So much of the time is given over to them singing together. And then you have fights and spectacles and a wedding and these sorts of things. But you have so much time. 4 extensive soprano tenor duets. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of singing. And it's beautiful singing. There are beautiful moments in this opera. They're really powerful. But it's a huge amount of time to give over. Now, this is something that, irresponsibly, I just want to talk about for a minute, especially because next season, of course, as you know, the Dallas Opera is doing Tristan. In concert, in a concert form, right? So, if any of you have seen Tristan before, you know that the entire second act, almost, is given over.
In concert.
What's that?
It's kind of in concert, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly so. Yeah, it is. It's in concert. They just sing and sing and sing their love duet, right? They unravel the fabric of time, with their endless duetting. And you get lost. I mean, you totally get lost in their imaginary sort of reality, right? You get lost inside their world that they've created for you, this sonic universe that Wagner presents for you, this endless tableau. And you get upset at the end when the dawn song happens and it gets interrupted in a way. I mean, it's a relief because finally the act is over. But on the other hand, it's like paradise has been destroyed. Paradise has been ruined. And how is paradise constituted in Wagner? The sound of these two voices in tandem, right? Sheer sound of these voices together. It's a physical, it's a union of sound, symbolizing the physical union. In just such a way, I think, Gounod tries to give us a modest version of the same. He tries to give us this extensive period in which there's a new reality. It's a vocal reality, where reality is created through the sheer grain of voice, through the sheer nature of sound, and that becomes reality. There's some beautiful